"You're a stupid old man," my son shouted, and then, shockingly, he slapped me in front of his wife. The sound of his hand against my face echoed in the room, sharp and humiliating. My clean-shaven face reflected no rage, only disbelief and a quiet, simmering pain. My gray hair, styled neatly as always, seemed to catch the light in defiance. A silent reminder that life had taught me patience and resilience. His wife gasped behind him, frozen, clutching the edge of the dining table. The crystal glasses rattled as if startled by the tension, and a faint smell of roasted chicken filled the air, mingling with the metallic sting of anger. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the surge of a lifetime of pride and endurance. Yet I remained perfectly still. I remembered the countless times I had guided him, taught him, loved him unconditionally. How had it come to this? How had the boy I had raised, nurtured, and protected turned so cold, so cruel? He had married, yes, and perhaps the new family life had inflated his ego. But no lesson in civility could have justified the slap, the public insult, the declaration that I was stupid. I breathed slowly, letting the anger pass like wind through the trees. There was a clock ticking softly on the wall, the rhythmic pulse of normalcy in a room that now felt like a battlefield. The wine glass I had poured for him, forgotten in the moment, reflected his face, a mixture of arrogance and self-satisfaction. I thought of his childhood, his first steps in the living room, the scraped knees I had bandaged, the late-night talks about dreams and responsibility. Those memories struck harder than his hand ever could. And yet, the law, life, and inevitable consequences would ensure that today, his triumph would be short-lived. I took a slow step back, adjusting my coat over my slightly healthy frame. My hair caught the late afternoon light, silver strands shining, almost like armor. I did not shout. I did not raise a hand. I only observed, quietly calculating the next steps. Rage can break a man. Patience and foresight break worlds. That night I went home, not his home, but mine. The apartment I had prepared years ago, small but comforting, filled with memories, quiet dignity, and calm. I called my lawyer, a few whispers, a couple of signatures, and actions were in motion. By morning, everything he thought untouchable, his accounts, his assets, his sense of control, would face consequences he could never anticipate. Meanwhile, he slept with arrogance still wrapped around him like a blanket. He did not know the law had already begun to act, the financial systems aligning to freeze his access, leaving him powerless to act. His wife, who had watched the slap, would witness the unfolding drama, helpless to intervene. The tables were quietly turning. I remembered my late wife and how she had taught me that true strength was calm, deliberate, and unshakable. And in that memory, I found peace. I knew that the universe, patience, and planning were allies far more devastating than anger. He would wake, expect normalcy, and find none. His world, built on entitlement and cruelty, was about to crack. As I looked at the city lights through my window that night, I realized that vengeance, when tempered with wisdom, is almost invisible until it strikes. By sunrise, the boy who had slapped his father, the man who had thought himself in control, would confront the immovable consequences of his arrogance. I slept that night with calm certainty, not because I enjoyed seeing him punished, but because the lesson he needed would be learned fully, completely, and irrevocably. And when he realized that, perhaps he would finally understand that life is earned through respect, not demanded through cruelty. By the time dawn broke, the air smelled of frost and new beginnings, and I, standing quietly at my window, hair perfectly in place, clean-shaven face serene, knew that soon my son would see the world as I had always known it, one in which actions have weight, and disrespect carries its price. The morning sun had barely touched the city when my phone buzzed. I didn't need to look to know, it was confirmation. His accounts, the ones he had boasted about, the ones he thought untouchable, had been frozen. The law had quietly intervened, guided by the paperwork I had filed the night before. My son, who had shouted, slapped, and humiliated me, would soon discover that arrogance and entitlement have consequences far heavier than any slap or insult. I watched from a distance as he began to stir. His brow furrowed, hands reaching instinctively for his wallet, his phone, his laptop. Nothing worked. The accounts he had relied on for power, for his lifestyle, were inaccessible. The bank's automated systems denied him entry. Every attempt he made was met with cold, bureaucratic precision. The air around him seemed heavier, every step slower, every breath a little more strained. His wife noticed first. She had witnessed the slap, and now she saw him fumbling, panicked, frustrated, and powerless. Her face shifted from concern to shock, realizing that this was no minor inconvenience. Her husband, the man who had tried to assert dominance over his father, was suddenly vulnerable, stripped of control in the most humiliating way possible. I didn't intervene. I walked along the sidewalk across the street, hair perfectly styled, clean-shaven, face calm, slightly healthy, build steady, observing quietly. Patience was my ally. There was no need for confrontation. Consequences were already doing their work. The gentle sway of the trees, the early birds calling, the faint hum of traffic all contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding on the porch of a man who had thought himself invincible. He tried phone calls, emails, frantic messages to colleagues, even hastily summoned his accountant. Every attempt ended in rejection or automated replies. The pride that had carried him, the arrogance that had led him to slap his father in front of his wife, began to crumble. For the first time in years he was truly helpless. I thought of his childhood again, of the patience I had shown, of the lessons in respect and humility I had tried to instill. I had warned him, counseled him, and now the universe itself was enforcing what words could not. Every dollar he could not access was a reminder of the arrogance he had wielded so carelessly. Every blocked account was a quiet testament to the consequences of cruelty. Neighbors began to notice, though cautiously. Some peeked from windows, some whispered on porches. The man who had once carried himself with bluster and entitlement now moved like a shadow of himself, fumbling, panicked, and powerless. There was no shame in my gaze, only observation, the calm recognition that life sometimes teaches lessons far more efficiently than anger ever could. Hours passed, and his panic grew. He attempted to contact his father, calling my number repeatedly. I ignored it. He had learned, or was beginning to learn, that I do not respond to threats or arrogance. My presence, my patience, my quiet strength were far more effective than any shouting match. By mid-afternoon, he was sitting on the curb outside his own home, head in his hands, finally beginning to feel the weight of his actions. His wife sat beside him, her hands on his shoulders, powerless to undo the financial freeze, powerless to restore the authority he had arrogantly claimed. For the first time, he understood fear, helplessness, and the bitter taste of consequences. I walked slowly past, my silhouette calm, hair perfectly in place, clean-shaven face serene, slightly healthy build moving with quiet authority. He looked up, eyes wide, realizing that the father he had slapped was not just alive, but untouchable in ways he could never have imagined. My patience, my foresight, and my calm endurance had orchestrated this silent justice. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. He remained on the curb, trembling, sweating, exhausted, and broken. Every arrogant word, every slap, every shout had led him here. And I knew, watching him struggle under the weight of his own actions, that the lesson had taken root. By evening, the city lights reflected in his eyes as he stared at the blank screens of his devices, at the frozen bank accounts, at the life he had thought secure. He had demanded respect through force, through anger. And now he understood fully that respect must be earned, not seized. And power without wisdom is nothing but fragile pride. And in that quiet evening, I finally allowed a small smile to touch my lips. Not of malice, not of gloating, but of satisfaction that justice, calm, patient, invisible, had prevailed. The man who had slapped me, the boy who had shouted and humiliated, was finally learning the hardest lesson of his life, that consequences, when delivered silently and deliberately, are far more powerful than any act of rage. By mid-morning, the neighborhood was buzzing quietly with whispers. Some neighbors had noticed the unusual scene, a man pacing, hands shaking, eyes darting between his devices and the front door, realizing for the first time that control was an illusion. My son, who had once commanded and threatened, now looked small and vulnerable, his arrogance shattered by the reality I had set in motion. I remained across the street, hair perfectly styled, clean-shaven, face calm, slightly healthy build standing firm. I didn't need to intervene. The consequences were speaking louder than words ever could. Every failed phone call, every denied login attempt, every blocked account was a lesson delivered in real time. And he was learning it, painfully, thoroughly, without my having to lift a finger. He tried everything, calling colleagues, sending frantic emails, even attempting to reach friends who might have influence over his finances. Each effort met with silence, automated rejections, or polite refusals. I watched his shoulders slump further, his movements jerky and uncertain, the weight of helplessness pressing down like an invisible force. Pride, once his shield, now mocked him with every failed attempt. His wife hovered near, unsure how to react. Fear and concern mixed in her expression. She had witnessed the slap, and now she was seeing the consequences unfold, helplessly. There were no words to comfort him, no charm or manipulation that could restore what he had lost. He was facing the raw truth, that arrogance has a price, and entitlement is no substitute for responsibility. I thought of my own life, of patience cultivated over decades. My late wife had taught me that true power is quiet, deliberate, and often invisible until it strikes. That lesson had guided me through every betrayal, every challenge, every heartache. And now it guided my son toward understanding. Whether he wanted it or not, he sank to the curb outside the house, fingers running through his short, clean-cut hair, shoulders shaking with exhaustion and fear. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. I could see every subtle sign of panic, the trembling hands, the quickened blink, the way he flinched at each sound. Even the birdsong overhead seemed loud. Accusing. Time moved slowly, deliberately. I let the morning stretch, allowing him to fully absorb his helplessness. There was a rhythm to it, a pacing that gave the lesson depth. Arrogance collapses when met with silence, patience, and inevitability. And I had given him all three in abundance. By afternoon, he attempted to approach the house, as if sheer determination could undo reality. I stayed still, watching, hair catching the sun, clean-shaven face composed, slightly healthy build unshaken. The door remained locked. The mailbox remained untouched. His panic intensified with each step, his frustration mounting like a storm cloud overhead. I remembered moments from his youth lessons about respect, accountability, and humility I had tried to instill. I had shown him that life is earned, not demanded. And now, the universe itself was reinforcing the lesson I had failed to deliver fully in words. The financial freeze, the blocked accounts, the helplessness, it was all a silent teacher. And he was its student. Neighbors began to peek cautiously, some whispering, some shaking their heads. The son who had slapped his father and shouted insults was now exposed, vulnerable, and powerless. I could almost hear the internal struggle. Pride against reality, arrogance against consequence. And I knew that this struggle, witnessed quietly across the street, would leave a mark deeper than any words, punishment, or lecture ever could. As evening approached, he slumped further, finally sitting down completely, head in hands. Sweat glistened on his forehead. Fear and despair clouded his face. I could see the realization settling in. Every demand, every insult, every act of entitlement had been met by calm, deliberate consequence. And he understood finally that life does not bend to arrogance. I walked slowly toward my own home. Slightly healthy frame moving with calm authority, hair in perfect place, clean-shaven face serene. He did not follow. He could not. And in that moment, I understood that justice had been served. Not by anger or revenge, but by patience, planning, and inevitability. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, his panic had given way to quiet despair. He sat there, shivering slightly in the cool evening air. The weight of helplessness pressing down, finally humbled. Finally understanding that disrespect carries consequences heavier than he could have imagined. And I knew, quietly, that the next day, he would wake with a new perspective. Pride had been broken, arrogance crushed, and humility quietly seated. Sometimes I thought, the universe delivers lessons in ways far more lasting than anger ever could. And in that realization, I found calm satisfaction. The morning light crept over the rooftops, gentle yet unforgiving, illuminating a world that had shifted overnight. My son, once brimming with arrogance, now sat on the curb outside his own home, head buried in his hands. His clean-shaven face was pale, hair slightly disheveled, suit rumpled from restless attempts to regain control. For the first time, the power he had clung to, the wealth he had flaunted, felt utterly useless. I stood across the street. Slightly healthy frame relaxed but resolute. Gray hair perfectly styled, clean-shaven face calm. Warm eyes watching every subtle motion he made. The world moved around him as if taunting, leaves rustling, a dog barking in the distance, neighbors stirring behind curtained windows. Everything he had relied upon, money, influence, entitlement, was frozen in place. And I, as always, did nothing but observe. He lifted his head slowly, shoulders slumped, eyes red and swollen. Panic had given way to realization, confusion to guilt, arrogance to humble shock. He reached for his phone, then paused, realizing again that every account, every asset, every lifeline he had counted on was inaccessible. The cold grip of helplessness wrapped him tightly. His wife approached hesitantly, hand on his shoulder, her expression a mixture of fear and shame. There was no magic word, no charm, no apology that could immediately undo the consequences of his actions. She had witnessed the slap, heard his insults, and now faced the crushing weight of reality beside him. I could see her silent acknowledgement. He had finally met a force greater than his rage. A force unyielding, deliberate, and entirely just. I began to walk slowly toward him. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with the deliberate calm of a man who knows the weight of life's lessons. My hair caught the early sunlight, shining silver and neatly styled, clean-shaven face serene, slightly healthy frame moving with quiet authority. Each step was measured, purposeful, a silent statement that strength is patience, not shouting. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment his eyes reflected disbelief. "Dad, I don't understand," he stammered, voice cracking under the weight of humility he had never known. The arrogance that had fueled him moments before was completely gone. He realized painfully that entitlement and aggression had no power against calm, deliberate justice. I stopped a few feet away, letting the silence fill the space between us. Silence, I knew, is a teacher far more powerful than words. He could feel the unspoken truth radiating from me. Respect cannot be demanded. Power cannot be taken. Arrogance will always encounter its reckoning. "Son," I said finally, my voice gentle but firm, "you thought a slap and a shout could change the world. But the world has its own rules. Respect, patience, humility, these are not optional. They are the foundations of life. You will remember this day, not because I punished you, but because life itself has. Tears streamed down his face, fingers trembling as he ran them through his hair. He swallowed hard, finally seeing the reality he had ignored for so long. Pride, arrogance, and rage had led him here. Power without wisdom and restraint is always temporary. I watched him slowly rise, still fragile, still shaken, but beginning to absorb the lesson fully. His shoulders were straighter, though the weight of humiliation remained. His wife remained silent beside him, witnessing the transformation silently. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light across the street, highlighting the father who had endured and the son who was finally learning. I placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Not as punishment, not as dominance, but as guidance. "Learn from this," I said softly. "Life has given you a chance to see yourself clearly. Do not waste it. Actions have consequences, son. Words have weight. Humility is earned, not given." He nodded, shivering slightly, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of understanding, of real change. He had faced the consequences of his own arrogance, and in doing so, had discovered the value of patience, respect, and reflection. As I turned to walk back toward my own home, slightly healthy, gray hair shining, clean-shaven face serene, I knew the lesson had been fully delivered. He would never forget the morning his world froze. The morning he learned that respect cannot be demanded, that consequences follow arrogance relentlessly, and that sometimes the quietest presence, the calmest patience, is more powerful than any fury. And in that calm realization, I found peace. The boy who had slapped his father, who had shouted insults and demanded control, had finally met a force he could not fight. And in that meeting, life had taught him its hardest, most enduring lesson.